Hello, I'm Sevil Mikhailova.
And I'm Khalil Salhani, and this is News in Focus.
The world is suffering from a number of conflicts. If you look at the map, you will see a number of conflicts scattered all around the globe. And they all are waiting for their solution.
No continent is immune to lingering conflicts. The danger, of course, in allowing a conflict to linger is that with time, conflicts tend to take on a life of their own. They become more complex, they become more difficult to resolve, and they draw in more actors in one way or another, be it as interveners or as supporters of one party or the other. It makes the problem more compound and that much harder to resolve.
Nagorno-Karabakh conflict remains a pain for decades and with no solution in sight. Armenia occupied 20% of Azerbaijani territory in a war which left over 1 million Azerbaijanis displaced in their native lands. What is dangerous here is that the conflict remains a trigger point for greater violence and can flare up at any moment.
It can, and it can bring in other countries into the conflict as well. To discuss that and to find out what can be done about these affairs, we'd like to bring in Ariel Cohen, a specialist from Washington, D.C. Mr. Cohen is the director for the Center for Energy and Natural Resources and Politics. Welcome, Ariel.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure.
Ariel, the question we have for you is, Nagorno-Karabakh is very dear to our hearts here, and is there a solution in sight? You're seeing it removed from the area. You're not as close as we are to the problem, so you have a little bit of a better, maybe a different view, let's say. Is there a solution to that problem?
Eventually, I hope and pray to God that there is a solution, but it will take a lot of bravery on behalf of the two leaderships, of the leadership of Azerbaijan and the leadership of Armenia. In the end of the day, the war, which is the other solution, the other side of this conflict, right. The war is not in the interest of either Azerbaijan or Armenia.
Exactly.
But let's take a look historically. Historically, this was the territory of Azerbaijan, recognized both in the era of first independence in 1918 and during the Soviet time. This was administrative territory of Azerbaijan, populated by Azeris and Armenians. The conflict started in 1988 and continued on and off until the ceasefire in 1994.
So, Mr. Cohen, you said that this year the diplomacy would not be a good idea to solve the conflict. You also, before it mentioned that the war is not a good tool to resolve the conflict because it will leave many victims, and both nations actually don't need war. And what is the actual tools to resolve the conflict then?
Well, I'm sorry if I misspoke. I did not say the diplomacy is not a good tool. Diplomacy is always a good tool. I am just saying that we have over 25 years of the lack of a diplomatic solution, and the international system is such that there are no indications we're going to have a breakthrough this year in particular. Diplomacy was given its chance both with the Russian leadership under President Medvedev and with the U.S. leadership more than 10 years ago when Colin Powell convened the two presidents, and then at the meetings in Paris and elsewhere. Now,
this problem has been lingering for 22 years now, Ariel. It boggles my mind as to why the Armenians are playing hard to get when they are in trouble. Their economy is suffering. They're short on goods, on food, on everything, and yet they're playing hard to get. Why is that?
And what are the obstacles, Mr. Cohen, in resolution of the conflict? So if the two nations are really in trouble.
The Armenian side is supported in its intransigence by Russia. Right. Russia put pressure on Armenia to join the Eurasian Union that is led by Moscow. Right. And that gives Armenia a lot of diplomatic and military support. But I would point out that the Eurasian Union Agreement, at the insistence of President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan and of others, does not cover Karabakh. And the question is, if, God forbid, there is a war, I said already that the war is not in the interest of either side, in my view, definitely not in the interest of people who may be hurt. It's not in the interest of mothers and fathers that send their kids to the war. But if the war breaks out, to what extent Russia will provide assistance? In my view, and I've been to Russia many, many times, and am an expert on the Russian military, etc., I do believe that Russia will provide a certain level of support with the weapons and possibly even with troops.
Do you think that Russia is not taking advantage, let's say, of the situation to impose its will in the region by keeping Armenia hooked on its weapon systems that it needs to defend itself?
If I understood the question correctly, you're talking about Russia having an interest in continuing
Yes.
the conflict.
Right.
And clearly we saw this in Georgia, for example, when Russia supported Abkhaz separatism. Russia supported and sent actually its own leadership to South Ossetia, where the leaders of the small enclave is ethnically Russian.
Right.
The Russians are applying the same old Roman principle of divide and rule and divide and conquer to South Caucasus.
Right.
If you read Russian experts and ideologists such as Alexander Dugin and others, you'll find that they still treat South Caucasus as at least their sphere of influence, if not their empire. And other powers in the region, such as Iran, do not help because Iran has excellent relations with Armenia.
Right.
Armenia benefits from trade with Iran, which is under economic sanctions from the West. So the Iranians are also interested in Armenia being anti-Western because Iran is in confrontation with the United States and the West over its nuclear program.
Right.
So there are outside regional powers that are not interested in peace. They're interested in continuation of the conflict, whether it's a frozen conflict or, in some cases, are interested in quote-unquote hot conflict because the Iranians, for example, do not view the secular regime of President Ilham Aliyev in Azerbaijan as a friendly, ideologically speaking regime. The population, of course, is Shia on both sides, but the republic in Azerbaijan is much more open, much more free internally and socially, whereas Iran is a theocracy. It's a religious dictatorship in the social sphere. So the Iranians don't like the regime of President Ilham Aliyev. And unfortunately, the Russians, instead of recognizing how stable Azerbaijan is, want to weaken it because they consider it too pro-Western. And it's a paradox because just yesterday there was a big event in Washington in which Azerbaijan was severely criticized for alleged violations of human rights and a crackdown on activists who are in opposition. So it's hard to please everybody for Azerbaijan today, and that too contributes to continuation of this conflict.
As we said in the opening minutes of this program, that the longer a conflict lingers, the harder it is to resolve. Thank you, Ariel, very much. That was Ariel Cohen, the Director of Center for Energy and Natural Resources and Politics in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen, for joining us.